Welcome to Starlight Sci-Fi, your home for epic science fiction stories and unforgettable human triumphs. Subscribe for weekly tales where humanity doesn't just survive, it dominates. Rocket. The Galactic Academy had never accepted a human cadet before. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were a curiosity, fragile, primitive, and reckless. So when a single human finally walked those prestigious gates, every species scoffed. No one expected him to last a week. No one expected Eric Kane to become the highest-scoring cadet in the Academy's history. They laughed at the human until they saw what he could do. The Galactic Academy was more than a school. It was a symbol, suspended in geosynchronous orbit above Voron 6. It shimmered like a celestial crown in the darkness, home to the brightest and deadliest minds from across 70 starfaring civilizations. Every species considered it an honor to send their elite to train within its dome halls and gravity-twisted arenas. Entry was not granted lightly. Bloodlines, neural performance scores, planetary rankings. Only the best were even considered. So when a human arrived, the Academy's corridors buzzed with disbelief. His name was Eric Kane. No entourage followed him. No genetic modifications enhanced his form, and his records were unremarkable by most interstellar standards. He came alone, carrying nothing but a standard-issue duffel bag and the wide-eyed expression of someone used to worlds where gravity shifted on command. The admissions committee had nearly dismissed his application entirely, until a last-minute recommendation from a Terran Black Ops unit forced reconsideration. Even then, it had taken months of debate and a reluctant vote to let him through the gates. Humans were a curious anomaly in galactic circles. Technologically average, physically unimpressive, and culturally inconsistent. Their military history was erratic, marked by brilliance in moments, but overall deemed chaotic and emotionally driven. To most of the Academy's cadets, Eric's presence was a novelty, like a museum piece brought to life. Some whispered that Earth must have paid their way in. Others assumed he'd be gone by the first elimination round. As the weeks passed, the jokes escalated. His anatomy was endlessly critiqued. No exoskeleton, no regenerative tissue, no built-in weaponry. One cadet from the Drenari clade publicly questioned whether he was there to fight or to sweep the training decks. Another offered to donate part of her redundant lung to help him survive high-oxygen environments. Even the Academy's autoscribe registered increased sarcasm levels when logging peer feedback. Eric didn't respond to any of it. He wasn't hostile, nor was he timid. He listened, observed, and stayed out of the spotlight. In drills, he kept pace without standing out. In lectures, he asked no questions. To most observers, it seemed he was simply trying to survive long enough to go home. But beneath the surface, something else was unfolding. Eric was studying everything: movement patterns, species behavior, instructor biases, simulation algorithms. What others interpreted as passivity was, in truth, deliberate calibration. While his peers flexed muscle and heritage, Eric measured angles, analyzed reaction times, and quietly took mental notes on every scenario presented. He knew he wasn't stronger, faster, or genetically superior, but he didn't need to be. He just needed to understand the rules better than anyone else, so he could break them more effectively. And when the first result began to surface, no one was prepared for what the fragile little human was truly capable of. Life at the Galactic Academy was built on pressure, relentless, calculated pressure. Every waking moment was part of a meticulously crafted system designed to expose flaws, amplify strengths, and mold cadets into perfect tools for war. Lectures were delivered at blistering speeds, often in 5 languages simultaneously. Theoretical assessments were intentionally vague, forcing cadets to consider hundreds of possible interpretations. Training sessions operated on shifting terrain, with gravity fluctuating mid-exercise, and simulations could be interrupted by surprise live-fire drills without warning. The Academy's goal wasn't just excellence. It was endurance through chaos. It was here, buried under the storm of expectations, that the first signs of Eric Kane's potential began to emerge. The initial rounds of academic testing were purely theoretical. strategy formulation, logistics, energy economics, interspecies conflict resolution, all encoded into a system that analyzed not only right answers, but how cadets arrived at them. Most approach these tests with predictability, relying on instinct honed by cultural doctrines or species-specific protocols. The largest, most dominant races tend to perform adequately, guided by centuries of warfare tradition. Eric, however, approached every scenario like a puzzle. He didn't look for the correct answer. He dismantled the assumptions behind each question. On the first simulation, a supply convoy was stranded in hostile space. Cadets were asked how they would defend it with limited resources. While most responses detailed standard fleet formations and defensive lines, Eric rerouted decoy signals to lure hostiles away and turn asteroid debris into signal jammers. Ideas not even in the simulation's instruction set. When results were posted, his name appeared near the top. That alone stirred confusion. But when he remained in the top percentile across multiple exams, disbelief turned into suspicion. Rumors began to spread. Some claimed he'd hacked the test system. Others said the instructors were going easy on him to avoid diplomatic scandal. A few insisted Earth's AI had done the work for him. But when 3 instructors reviewed his problem-solving logs manually, they found something deeply unsettling. Eric's thought patterns weren't mechanical or predictable. They were lateral, chaotic, and painfully human. He weighed losses differently, accepted risk more fluidly, and often chose solutions no algorithm would recommend. He was, in a very real sense, rewriting the Academy's entire understanding of tactical logic. Despite this, many cadets still dismissed the success. Written theory meant little in real-world combat. Intelligence was useful, but out there on the battlefield, reflexes and resilience mattered more. To them, Eric's victories on paper were nothing more than trivia. A human scoring high on tests didn't change the fact that he was still weak, still soft, still bore on a world where most predators walked on 2 legs and carried guns. They watched his rise with thinly veiled irritation, waiting for the inevitable fall. But Eric Kane wasn't climbing for recognition. He wasn't there to prove his species' worth. He was preparing, quietly, intentionally, because the battlefield, real or simulated, was where he would speak loudest. And when that time came, no one would be laughing. The gauntlet was not just a test. It was a rite of passage. Cadets who survived it wore invisible badges of honor. Those who failed often transferred or quit altogether. It was the Academy's most notorious training simulation, a multi-phase combat trial designed to strip away bravado and reveal the raw truth of a warrior's capability. No cadet knew what version of the gauntlet they'd face. It changed constantly, pulling from thousands of preloaded environments and threat profiles. Some had to traverse jungle terrain under constant orbital bombardment. Others found themselves in pitch-dark zero gravity, with motion-sensitive drones hunting every breath. The system adapted mid-run, learning from the cadets' tactics and countering them in real time. When Eric Kane's name appeared on the schedule for his first gauntlet, a small crowd began to form in the observation chamber. Most came out of curiosity. After all, he'd been topping theory exams and simulator logs. But that meant little here. This was physical, brutal, real. No keyboard could save him now. Some even joked about timing how fast he'd fail. The record for shortest run had been 11 minutes. Most predicted Eric wouldn't last 5. Then the simulation began. The environment he faced was classified as Class 9, Urban Collapse. A broken cityscape hung in the void, shattered buildings floating through microgravity. Hostile AI patrols stalked every sector. Ammunition was scarce. The objective was simple: retrieve a black box hidden deep within a debris zone and extract to a rendezvous point without being neutralized. The early minutes were exactly what everyone expected. Eric moved cautiously, staying in cover, using unconventional paths. But then he began to do things the simulation wasn't designed for. He lured enemy drones into unstable structures, bringing down entire towers to crush them. He redirected signal beacons to create false leads. He used floating debris as mobile shields, angling them in precise trajectories, using only his boots and compressed air vents. 30 minutes in, the tone inside the observation chamber had changed. Instructors leaned forward. Cadets stopped whispering. For the first time, they weren't watching to mock. They were trying to understand. Eric wasn't surviving the gauntlet. He was mastering it. He was manipulating the environment as if he had designed it himself. Every move was purposeful. Every decision a calculated risk that paid off. When the black box was retrieved, he didn't make a direct path to extraction. He set traps along the route, misleading his pursuers, cutting them off in their own flanking maneuvers. By the time he emerged at the simulated extraction point, the observation chamber was dead silent. The system froze for a second, something that had never happened before, and flagged his performance as abnormal. Manual review was triggered. 3 instructors combed the footage, expecting to find a glitch, an exploit, some kind of unfair advantage. They found none. What they discovered was worse. For the Academy, at least, Eric hadn't bent the rules. He had played by them, and still crushed a simulation that had been designed to overwhelm the galaxy's best. And for the first time, whispers began to spread that the human might be something more than just a fluke. The Academy prided itself on objectivity. Every cadet, regardless of species or background, was monitored, measured, and analyzed. Biometric data, performance metrics, neural feedback. Nothing was left to chance. Behind the scenes, a learning AI called the Instinct algorithm reviewed millions of data points in real time, identifying patterns, predicting outcomes, and adjusting training modules accordingly. For decades, the system had been a reliable evaluator. It understood how warriors thought. It knew how an Avenari would retreat under pressure. It could anticipate a Dravik's berserker response to injury. The algorithm wasn't just a tool. It was a silent architect behind the Academy's evolution, until it met Eric Kane. At first, it treated him like any other cadet. It analyzed his vitals, mapped his decision trees, and logged his reaction times. But the data didn't make sense. Eric's responses lacked consistency. He didn't follow established combat doctrines, nor did he favor one strategy over another. Sometimes, he played it safe, hiding, waiting, setting traps. Other times, he charged headlong into situations that should have ended in failure, only to emerge victorious. It wasn't randomness. It was deliberate unpredictability. The algorithm flagged him for nonlinear behavior. At first, this label had no real consequence. Some cadets from chaotic predator species showed similar anomalies early on, but Eric's readings didn't settle. If anything, they grew more erratic and effective. During squad simulations, Eric displayed an ability to anticipate his teammates' errors and compensate before they occurred. When facing unknown threats, he didn't hesitate like others did. He moved as if he had already calculated every possible outcome, as if the unknown wasn't intimidating, it was exciting. The algorithm began adjusting the difficulty of his simulations. Obstacles became more complex, enemy tactics more sophisticated. Yet Eric adapted faster than the changes could evolve. In one notorious trial, a rapid deployment mission meant to overwhelm even the top cadets was completed by Eric with such precision that the system rebooted the scenario mid-run, assuming a processing fault. Then came the live team combat exercise. Cadets were split into squads in order to disable a hostile installation guarded by automated drones and reactive turrets. Eric's team included 3 physically superior species, warriors known for strength, speed, and endurance. Most assumed he'd take a backline support role. Instead, Eric rewrote the team strategy entirely. He turned a mission into a psychological operation. Rather than a direct assault, he staggered distractions, redirected security patrols using audio feedback loops, and leveraged his squad strengths in ways even they hadn't considered. The facility was neutralized without a single injury. Not one shot was fired from the squad's weapons. In the after-action report, the algorithm updated his combat tag, Strategic Apex. This label had never been used for a cadet before. It was reserved for high-threat simulations, synthetic opponents designed to outclass every species' strengths. For the algorithm to apply it to a real cadet was unprecedented. Within days, instructors began altering their lecture material. Tactical examples now included human models. And quietly, beneath the surface of Academy protocol, one unsettling question began to take root. What happens if Earth decides to train an army of Erics? At the halfway mark of the training cycle, the Academy entered its most scrutinized phase, performance review. It was more than a summary of progress. It was a reckoning. Instructors presented detailed evaluations to the Council, the governing body that determined a cadet's future. Cadets who failed to impress were either reassigned to lesser roles in their planetary forces or quietly dismissed from the program altogether. For most, it was a moment of anxiety. For Eric Kane, it was a storm he had seen coming from the start. Normally, cadets were reviewed in small cohorts, presented side by side with peers of similar ranking. Performance was compared, questioned, and justified. But this time, the Council made a rare decision. Eric would be evaluated alone. The reason was never officially stated, but everyone understood his results were problematic. The numbers were too high. His combat scores outpaced every other cadet by margins the algorithm couldn't explain. His adaptability rating had reached a category the system had never used before, unsimulated. That meant his behavior in simulations no longer matched any predicted profile, not even the synthetic perfect tactician models designed to test cadets under pressure. He wasn't just outscoring the competition. He was breaking the upper limits of the Academy's own benchmarks. Behind closed doors, Council members examined his record again and again. They dissected every training log, every mission report, every neural recording from his sim sessions. They weren't looking for brilliance. They were searching for a flaw, a cheat, a malfunction, something to explain how a human, a being from a species barely acknowledged on Galactic stage, could be doing what no other cadet had done in decades. But the deeper they looked, the more uneasy they became. Eric hadn't skipped steps. He hadn't exploited systems or ignored rules. He had mastered the rules, then used them in ways the designers never anticipated. His test responses weren't just correct. They were creative, abstract, sometimes even playful. In one tactical exercise meant to simulate a hostage rescue in hostile territory, Eric had bypassed the entire conflict by rerouting atmospheric controls, forcing the enemy to evacuate the facility before combat even began. The instructors who had once laughed at the sight of a lone human among apex predators now said little when his name came up. Some nodded with grudging respect. Others avoided the topic altogether. A few began researching Earth's history, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. And then came the most unsettling revelation of all: Eric wasn't peaking. His growth curve continued to climb with each new challenge. The AI projection models couldn't forecast his ceiling because it didn't exist yet. One senior instructor finally broke the silence during the review. His voice was low, but every council member heard it. If this is what one human can do on his own, what happens if Earth decides to send 10? No one answered. No one could, because the Academy had trained its fair share of monsters over the centuries. But this was something different. This was a warning in human skin. There was a shift in the air, subtle at first, but undeniable. Whispers no longer questioned whether Eric Kane belonged at the Academy. They questioned what he was capable of becoming. He had gone from oddity to outlier, from joke to phenomenon, but with recognition came resistance. Not from the instructors. They had grown silent, watchful. Not from the algorithm. It had long since adjusted its parameters to accommodate him. No, the pushback came from the cadets themselves. They had trained their whole lives for this. They had survived brutal selection processes, represented warrior cultures older than Earth's spacefaring history. And now, all eyes turned toward a human who had arrived with no reputation, no enhancements, no legacy, just results. It began with subtle sabotage during training runs, delays in equipment, Faulty briefing data. Once, his helmet was swapped with a crack unit that failed to maintain full atmospheric seal in a zero-G sim. He caught it before launch. He always caught it. Eric didn't retaliate. He didn't complain. He logged each event, made quiet mental notes, and adapted accordingly. Every inconvenience became another lesson. Every slight made him sharper. His resilience wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Where others relied on strength or speed, Eric wielded something far more dangerous: composure. He didn't crack under pressure, he sharpened under it. Then came the team trials. These exercises were designed to test group dynamics, forcing cadets of different species and specialties to collaborate under extreme stress. Teams were randomly assigned, with one exception. Eric was always placed in the most unstable groups. It didn't take long for cadets to realize these weren't tests of his skill. They were tests of his limits. One trial placed him with 2 combat brutes from a Vencor species, known more for rage than reason, and a frail tactician from a species that communicated primarily through scent-based pheromones. It should have been chaos. It was chaos, until Eric found a rhythm in it. He never tried to lead outright. He simply made success inevitable. He spoke when others didn't, stayed quiet when tensions flared, suggested actions that others believed were their own. His influence was invisible, but decisive. When the mission succeeded flawlessly, there were no cheers, no congratulations, only silence. The other cadets realized, perhaps for the first time, that Eric Kane didn't need allies. He just needed opportunity. After that, fear began to creep in, not the kind spoken aloud, but the quiet, unsettling awareness that something dangerous was growing in plain sight. Not because Eric was a threat, but because they couldn't understand why he was winning. He didn't have the fastest reflexes. He didn't boast superior firepower. He didn't even seem to enjoy competition. He simply outthought everyone, every time. It was during a post-trial analysis that an instructor muttered a phrase that spread like wildfire through the halls. He's not playing their game. They're all still in the arena. He's already figured out how to leave it. From that point on, Eric Kane wasn't just a human cadet. He was the one no one wanted to face. Graduation at the Galactic Academy was more than a ceremony. It was a spectacle, broadcast live to allied systems. It celebrated the finest warriors, tacticians, and strategists the galaxy had to offer. The final event was always the same: the Apex Trial, a full-scale war simulation. Unlike previous exercises, the Apex Trial wasn't built to test. It was built to break. Designed by war historians and neural architects, it merged the most brutal aspects of real galactic warfare into a single immersive battle. Survival alone was considered an achievement. Victory was almost myth. Cadets were split into factions and given minimal resources. Alliances could be formed or betrayed. Environmental hazards changed without warning. Objectives shifted mid-mission. For most, the Apex Trial was about enduring chaos. But for Eric Kane, it was something else entirely. From the moment the trial began, observers noted something strange. Eric didn't move with hesitation or confusion. He moved with clarity, as if he had already seen the outcome. While others scrambled for weapons and allies, Eric disappeared into the dust-stormed canyons of the outer zone. He resurfaced 2 hours later with a hijacked command rig and a makeshift drone swarm cobbled from wreckage. By then, half the factions were in disarray. Communications were jammed. Supply lines had collapsed. Eric's influence could be felt without ever seeing him. Resource caches looted before others arrived, ambushes sprung from nowhere, and rogue drone attacks that mirrored the Academy's own tactics. It wasn't just victory. It was control. In the final hour, when the simulation narrowed to its last 3 factions, 2 cadets formed an alliance to bring him down. Both were top-tier, the kind that broke records and commanded respect. Together, they outgunned him 5-1, and still they failed. Eric dismantled them in stages. He severed their supply chain, rerouted their recon data, and let them burn resources in traps he'd laid days before the final encounter. When he struck, it was with surgical precision No waste, no noise. By the end, Eric Kane stood alone. The simulation ended. The system froze again. For the second time in Academy history, the algorithm crashed. The debriefed data caused confusion, then alarm. Eric had completed every objective. Secondary, tertiary. Even hidden failsafes buried in the code that no cadet had ever discovered. The algorithm hadn't just been challenged, it had been defeated. His final score surpassed the upper threshold so completely that the metric had to be redefined. The Academy had no title for it, no precedent. For the first time, a human cadet had forced an institution designed by the galaxy's greatest minds to admit its own limitations. When the results were transmitted to the Galactic Council, silence fell across the chamber. No applause, no disbelief, just realization. They had underestimated Earth, not because it was weak, but because it had sent only one student, one outlier, one anomaly, and that anomaly had shattered everything they thought they knew. Eric Kane didn't just graduate. He rewrote the rules of war. Thank you for watching Starlight Sci-Fi. If you enjoyed this human versus galaxy tale, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. More epic HFY stories are on the way, because sometimes the most dangerous species are the ones you never see coming. Until next time, stay curious and stay human.